All right, so I gotta get something on my chest. So I was like, may do a bigger scope of this whole situation, but I was like, but I want to focus on the specifics of this thing where it has to do, like in media or whatever. But especially like I was like, I know we get it probably in all facets of life, but it really seems to do with like the stuff that I see where it's like the NBA, almost like wrestling, Marvel, all this type of stuff, and that basically is overly negative or overly positive. And now I was like, and there's a middle ground. Just too bad you don't. I really don't. I sometimes feel like I'm like, do how many people really do a good middle ground? The reason I say that is like, okay, I understand that in the last, especially like last, like seem like 7 years, we have just gotten like really, really negative with a lot of stuff that we talk about and we do. And to me, I was like, that really sort of increased with the way that we utilize a lot of these social media things. Then I was like, being on the internet, you being able to talk how you want to talk without there being really any repercussions, all this other stuff. Then I really think that's where this sort of came from. Because it's not that people haven't been negative before or whatever like that. It's just that it's at the increase to the point that basically everybody's also doing, when I was like, when there's some zig, there's also some zag, to where it's like, hey, something's so really negative. I was like, no, I'm not going to get into the negative. I'm going to do the positive. I think that's a good thing in itself. I was like, hey, if you kind of, was like, hey, nobody wants to be around a Debbie Downer, a negative Nancy all the time or whatever. It's cool if you, like, like, especially if you know each other, you got your moments, you got your time, you're going through stuff, all understandable. But for the most part, nobody wants to be that where everything you say is basically a drag, is a down. And it's like, Jesus Christ, can we enjoy something? You don't want to do that. So that's why I understand all the people that's like, hey, if you like what you like, then hey, you should be able to then ignore the best you can of people that's being negative. And I think that's true. I was like, you like that movie? You like that movie. You like that show? You like that show. You like watching this sport? You like watching this sport? So on and so on. But I do think there's also a turn where it's like, you can be too positive. I know that might sound weird because it basically sounds like you want to be too good or too much of a good thing, and it's like, yeah, because too much of a good thing can also be bad to you as well too. Not just with like eating stuff or whatever like that, or consuming things. I was like, everything needs sort of balance, but there is a little bit of like, and I think, and this is why I said more of the media stuff than like your own like personality. Cause I was like, if you're just overly positive or whatever as a personality, yeah, that might be annoying to some people. Cause I was like, some people, depending on how it comes across or whatever. But for the most part, that's your personality. I was like, that's different than you looking at every day going in about it and having a bright side to look at, or just being like, oh, I'm gonna just take everything as it comes with, and I was like, hey, this ain't that bad, and all this other stuff. I think that's totally fine. When it comes to like the stuff that you consume, that's a little bit different because I was like, I feel like these are things that you can be critical of. These are things that you can compare. These are things that you are talking about. And I was like, to me, I feel like as long as you're not downing somebody for whatever they're watching or whatever they're doing, then I think you're in the right of being able to do this. Like as long as you're not over here being like, well, you're just an idiot if you like this thing. And I was like, no, that's not the. I was like, that's not what we're talking about. If you sometimes I was like, I think it's okay even if you're able to be like, yo, I didn't like it. That sucked. That was trash. I think that's even fine or whatever. Like that. It's the constant repetition of it. To where I think like for the most part people do want to hear like, oh, well, if you thought it was trash, why? But then again, if I explain why and you don't agree with it, or you think I'm being too negative about it, then guess what? You're gonna shut me down just as much as anything either. So I was like, but sometimes I was like, being positive just for the sake of being positive because you're like, oh, everybody being too negative about this here or whatever. I think that also could do a little bit of harm as well too. Because the thing is, you put yourself into a corner. I was like, I think sometimes you can put yourself into a spot where it's like you are trying to defend it so much, or you're trying to make it seem like it's not. I was like that. There was like you can't talk about it in a certain type of way. And when you sort of put yourself like with some talking points where it's just like, well, that sounds like you're being critical once you start actually talking about it in the type of way. Or if you're over here trying to be like, basically, that's like, just because, like, for instance, let's just take, for instance, the new Captain America movie. I was like, some people thought it was okay, some people thought it was bad. Cool, sound about reasonable, right? Nobody. I was like, there's some people out there that really loved it. Cool, fine. If you loved it, you loved it. I was like, there's some people that thought it was horrible, that it was trash. Cool, all right, you throw it was trash, all right, yeah. But I was like, I don't think I need to lie, being like, oh, it's a really good movie, and I think it's getting too much hate. And I was like, you are being unreasonable for giving it an amount of hate, and it's like, no, it just, I was like, it obviously didn't do enough. It didn't do enough good to like generate enough applause from the people that's like, oh, it sounds like it's a good thing or whatever. I was like, I said in some cases, I was like, oh, it's like the earlier phase one movies, but at the same time, I was like, yeah, but that was also being compared to the other movies of its time. So it's like, that's, to me, I was like, to me, it's like, basically think about sports, where it's like, oh, this person's really great, and it's like, well, how would you think he would fare back in the day? It's like, if we're just gonna have a regular talk about it, cool, we can have a regular talk. But once we start getting really personal with it, then we're over here to not make it a fun exercise, because it's kind of like, well, I was like, I'm just gonna compare them with their peers of the day. Why am I going to try to compare them with somebody back then when I was like, stuff was different, traveling technology, all this other stuff. Same thing with movies. I was like, Marvel. It's like, hey, yeah. I was like, can you compare it to some of the Phase One movie? Yeah, you can, and you could be like, oh, it is better than, say, for instance, the first Cap or Thor: The Dark World for some, or whatever like that. But at the same time, when I also got some of these newer films, that's also what it's got to be compared with as well too, because guess what, when they didn't have nothing back then, it's sort of easier to sort of compare and do stuff compared to where it's like, yeah, I got all this history now though. I was like, it's just like sort of like us with as people. I was like, guess what, I was like, we can easily look at something back in the past and be like, oh, that was hella wrong with how we are doing stuff nowadays. So it's like, but at the same time, you also got to stay here. Because I was like, once you start looking at stuff there, you just like, yo, those people are really trash. It's like, yeah, everybody was sort of trash, especially considering that we're comparing to the rules that we're sort of doing by now. Basically, what I'm over here, and it sounds like I'm just talking about, but I was just like, I'm like, I think sometimes in a lot of these things, when you're overly positive and you're just trying to sometimes you're trying to just figure out a way to make it not sound as bad as in what it is. Like I said, and some of these things, it's just really about tone and what the words you say. Cause, like I said, if I said I was like, oh, I didn't really like the movie, it wasn't for me. That sounds way better than saying that shit sucked, that was trash, or whatever. Same thing of like telling somebody like, hey, you're not my type, instead of being like, you ugly. See how that, I was like two different ways of saying the same thing. But I was like, I just feel like I feel like sometimes we just go to too many opposite extremes in order to get to the same point that we want to talk about. And I was like, the reason, and I was like, and especially, and this is really going around with those three things that I was talking about. The NBA, where they're talking about whose fault is it that we are critical or talking badly about the NBA all the time or whatever. I was like, the wrestling fans, where they sometimes they're over here being like, that person just sucks. It's so bad, in a way where it's like, okay, this seems like this is very extreme or whatever, and then being like, oh, this is the best person ever. It's like, okay, we can calm down over there. If that's how you view it, that's one thing or whatever. And I was like, the way you talk about, but some of y'all are being overtly harsh with the thing. Going back to how I'm talking about how you sort of say things. Same thing with like Marvel moving some of their projects. Some of their stuff is just good, but then it's like, oh, it's mid, it's trash, instead of just being like, oh, it was okay, it was fine, or whatever. But then you go in overly positive where it's just kind of like, it's like, well, when you compare it to these movies back in the day, it's better. And it's like, okay, yeah, I was like, food is also better than back then, but I was like, I shouldn't also be comparing it to back then. I can also compare it to right now, and compare to right now, it's not good food. But back then, yeah, it was probably excellent food when there wasn't the same options or thing ever that. I was like, you can find a way to still be grateful about something while also being like, oh, I also want more I was like, you also want to be held to a certain like standard as well too. You shouldn't just accept less just because it was like, oh well, they try their best. I was like, no, I was like, this is not the same. I was like, this is not the same thing of just like trying your best when there's actually something to get there. This ain't like trying to be a good person. I was like, and even then, I was like, trying your best is not always good enough. Sometimes you gotta try harder. I was like, I was like, I don't know. I was like, I guess, yeah, I guess, like I said, with those things, like with wrestling, it's like, where it was like the whole thing with Jay, where it's like the most over guy in the company, and then some people, once he won the Rumble, here, everybody's like, oh my god, this trash guy that can't wrestle and all this other stuff, and it's like, okay, I was like, where were y'all at like a year ago or whatever? I was like, y'all, but I was like, we could critique them or whatever. And then some people on the, like, sometimes I listen to people podcasts, and it's like I was like, it's almost like trying to be like, it's almost like giving a backhanded compliment and sometimes, or about to say like I ain't gonna lie, it's about to be a lie. It's sort of where it's like, oh, that person's great, this person's great, they're a great wrestler, that's a great wrestler, and it's like, I don't need all this. I was like, I figured already that they're all pretty, like, for instance, like great wrestlers. I can figure that they all great wrestlers. You ain't gotta keep telling me that they're great wrestlers or whatever. I was like, surprise me with like when you say they're not really great in the ring or whatever, something like that. But if you're gonna tell me like, oh, they're great or something like, I don't want to say politically correct thing, but like just a universal type of way of being like if it's like, oh, it's their choice, they could do what they do. It's like, I asked you basically like your opinion of like this certain thing. I already assumed that they could do what they're gonna do because that's what they're gonna do. They're able to do that. Let's go past that. I don't need you to do that. I was like, yeah. I was like, I don't know. I was like, yeah, because then I started hearing about like the Marvel film and stuff like that, where it's like you just be appreciative that they're okay, they're not bad or whatever like that. And I was like, I can appreciate that my 2 hours wasn't wasted while also being like, I wish they would have did better in these movies. I can have both or whatever. I was like, I don't have to pick between the cake and eating it too. I was like, the baby is going to be in the bath water. I was like, the sink and the kitchen, all that other stuff. Anyway, I was like, that's enough. You get the point of what I'm trying to say. And I was like, maybe you don't. Hey, maybe I'm also part of the problem. I was like, I'm playing too much of the middle ground instead of picking a side of whether I think something trash or I absolutely loved it and I'm a dummy. But anyway, let me know what y'all think about this, if you understand what I'm trying to say and all this amongst all the stuff that we talk about. Anyway, till then, peace. I'm out.